Hey guys, tonight we're slipping off our sandals and stepping into the steamy, echoing world of ancient Rome's bathhouses. The air smells like heated marble, old olive oil, and something vaguely medicinal, but in a good way. There's shouting, laughing, slapping, and scraping, all bouncing off vaulted ceilings and tiled walls as if the whole building has something to say. The floor's slippery, the towels are minimal, and someone just tried to sell you a fish while completely nude. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Life's short. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is over there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I love knowing where in the world we're falling asleep together. Are more of a suggestion than a tool. You're standing outside a town that smells of wet wool and livestock, and you're about to start a job you didn't apply for. The last guy vanished, and here you are, handed a hood, a grimy axe, and a reputation that'll cling to you like wet linen in winter. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Kids don't throw stones at you, but they whisper stories about you being part demon. You don't get to sit at taverns unless it's in the corner, alone, with a mug that smells suspiciously like it's been rinsed with tears and fear. You start the afternoon like many Romans do, not at work, but on your way to the thermae, the public baths. And not just any old puddle with plumbing. These are architectural wonders. Giant complexes with domes, mosaic floors. Bathing in Rome is a social performance. You're not just here to scrub, you're here to be noticed. People greet each other with cheeky slaps and elaborate handshakes. Muscles are flexed. Political alliances are reaffirmed. One man is clearly here just to loudly laugh at nothing, but it's working. Everyone looks. Status in the bathhouse isn't just about toga fabric or coin purses. It's how you carry your sponge, how confidently you disrobe, how many people greet you by name. You've seen men lose arguments and, possibly, their reputations right here between the apoditerium, changing room, and the tepidarium, the warm room. Yes, there's a warm room, and a hot room. And it's not uncommon to run into senators here, glistening like overcooked chickens, or poets reciting drafts aloud over buckets of oil. Even emperors have dipped into these waters, though usually in private wings with fewer pickpockets and more slaves. And the Rosemary seems nervous. The first surprise? No soap. Romans think soap is barbaric. Instead, you'll slather yourself in olive oil and then scrape it off with a curved tool called a strigil. It's part exfoliation, part interpretive dance, and entirely awkward the first few times. There's a low murmur all around you. Politics, sports, and scandalous poetry. Sometimes all three in one sentence. The acoustics here are amazing. Even whispers seem to travel, which is unfortunate because the man beside you just loudly commented on your shoulder hair. And guess what? You're expected to know when and how to do each. The laws are complicated, written in Latin, and you can't read. Historians still argue whether the bathhouse was primarily a civic service or an imperial flex. It probably depends on where you were in the empire. In Rome proper, it's a luxurious necessity. In some distant outpost? A marvel, and maybe the only good thing the Romans ever built there. And yes, it's crowded. Like Gladiator Arena on free bread. Day crowded, but the congestion is part of the point. You're brushing past people you wouldn't normally meet. Philosophers, merchants, slaves, and the occasional guy loudly insisting his wine merchant is a fraud. The steam rises from the caldarium, fogging up the elaborate frescoes on the ceiling. One depicts Venus rising from the sea. Another, oddly, shows a man punching a dolphin. You blink and realize it's actually Neptune wrangling sea monsters, or maybe just having a moment. Your muscles scream from the weight. This thing isn't sharp. It's more of a glorified cleaver. You swing and instantly regret it. The floors are heated by a clever Roman invention, the hippocaust. A raised floor with hot air pumped underneath from furnaces. You can feel the warmth in your soles. It's toasty. It was a common household practice. And don't forget the practical side of layering. It also helped you dodge the draft. Castles and homes were notoriously leaky. Stone walls, wooden doors, and tiny windows meant cold air sneaked in everywhere. So, your bulging cloak was less about looking bulky and more about sealing your personal thermal bubble. Crowd leaves and the blood dries. You might laugh at the idea of smelling like a greasy, woolly sheep, but this was medieval fashion at its most functional. And for those brave enough, shaving parts of the head or keeping a certain hairstyle helped retain heat. More on that soon. Sometimes it's passed down, like a cursed family heirloom. Sometimes you commit a crime yourself, and the judge gives you a choice. Swing the axe or face it. So, as you pile on your layers tonight, remember, medieval people weren't just cold. They were engineers of warmth, mixing natural materials and a dash of grease to survive. Next time you complain about putting on a sweater, imagine having to grease yourself up before stepping outside. You accepted. Bare feet on cold stone. Not in medieval times, if you could help it. But beyond just socks and wooden shoes, medieval innovators figured out something that might surprise you. Underfloor heating. Yes, that cozy warmth spread. You find yourself stepping carefully across a room lined with thick, patterned tiles, each one warm beneath your soul. It's not magic. It's a revival of the ancient Roman hippocaust system, cleverly adapted to the Middle Ages. The hippocaust was an underfloor heating method where hot air from a furnace in colder regions. Some castles and monasteries featured stone or brick floors laid over channels or vents that directed warm air or smoke from the kitchen or hearth to heat the rooms. It wasn't perfect. You still had to be cautious about smoke fumes, but it worked surprisingly well. Stepping onto these warm floors was like a medieval version of heated tiles, or radiant floor heating. Try to act like it's normal to be rubbed. Here's the quirky twist. Some archaeological digs uncovered evidence of straw or hay packed beneath floors, which served as insulation to hold the heat longer. Imagine padding your floor with hay. That's some serious medieval cozy engineering. Historians still argue whether underfloor heating was common or a luxury reserved for the elite few. Some records suggest that while monasteries and castles had these heated floors, most peasants relied on fires and layers instead. And here's a modern sensory callback. Remember that warm brick from earlier? Now, imagine that warmth from beneath your feet, radiating up through the floor tiles. It's a different kind of comfort, subtle but relentless, coaxing warmth into every step you take. There's a carved relief, but why stop there? People also adapted their footwear to this heat innovation. Some wore leather slippers lined with fur to trap the warmth, while wealthier folks had shoes with thick soles and embroidered uppers. Not just style, but insulation in disguise. Undertones and faintly singed ambition. Village. Walking barefoot on a cold stone floor is a nightmare. But walking barefoot on a warm medieval tile, almost a luxury, if only your toes could send a thank you note through time. It's very possible that actual cleanliness was a happy side effect of a mostly social ritual. Next, we'll touch on how your head, and even your hair, played a surprisingly big role in keeping you warm when the wind was biting cold, and probably carrying 3 provinces worth of bacteria. One of the boys raises an eyebrow at you. It's not a judge. You might not think about your head as a key player in staying warm until you feel that sharp bite of winter air on your scalp. Medieval folks knew this well, and their heat hacks extended to clever headwear and even haircut tricks. After all, a warm head means a warm body, or so the saying goes. Better than the Hispanian kind. One is gesturing wildly with his strigil, dangerously close to a bystander's ear. Still a person or just a function? You start noticing your reflection less. Your hands feel heavier. You stop dreaming. First off, the hoods and hats of the medieval world were more than fashion statements. Thick woolen hoods, lined with fur or even padded with linen, kept the chill out like a snug fortress. The famous chaperone hood, with its long tail and elaborate folds, wasn't just stylish medieval flair. It was functional armor against cold wind. Pull it tight around your face, and the biting gusts lose their teeth. Again, you might chuckle at the sight of some of these hats, pointy, floppy, or extravagantly twisted, but they did their job. Some even had ear flaps or extended neck coverings, ensuring no part of your head was left vulnerable. The wealthy had access to but here's where it gets really interesting. Your haircut could be a survival tool. Certain monastic orders practiced tonsure, the shaving of the crown of the head, yet some believed that longer hair around the sides and back provided natural insulation. Meanwhile, historians still argue whether the exact styles were primarily dictated by fashion, religious custom, or thermal function. Some say tonsure was purely symbolic, but others argue it may have had practical effects on warmth, or at least hygiene in cold, damp monasteries. Probably not, but it feels like it does. And here's a quirky tidbit. In some colder regions, people wore animal skins or even hoods lined with the pelts of small animals, complete with ears or tails intact, essentially a medieval wearable pet to keep warm. This sounds more like a fantasy cosplay, but it was genuine cold weather gear. Go back and try again, and the crowd isn't patient. Speaking of ears, medieval ears didn't have the luxury of modern earmuffs, winning a war nobody expected to lose, reminding you that sometimes the underdogs, or underbirds, have the last laugh. Status symbols. The more elaborate, the higher your rank and presumably your access to warmth. The air is thick, dense, moist with the sighs of centuries. Right is a brutal mix of physics and guesswork. You find yourself in a dimly lit courtroom. somewhere in medieval Rome, where the air hangs heavy with incense and the murmur of anxious onlookers. Before you stands a rather unusual defendant, one so famous that even in death he commands attention. But tonight he isn't ruling an empire or signing decrees. Instead, Pope Formosus is on trial. Yes, on trial, as a corpse. Welcome to the macabre spectacle known as the Cadaver Synod, one of history's. You probably won't survive this trial if you're expecting a normal legal proceeding. Because here, the dead pope is propped up on a throne, robed, and wearing the papal tiara, as the living clergy accuse him of crimes like perjury and violating church law. The judge even asks the corpse questions, which obviously go unanswered. The scene is equal parts surreal and unsettling. Witnesses shout. Historians still argue whether the trial was driven more by political vengeance, power struggles within the church, or genuine theological disputes. What's clear is that this bizarre event reflects a period of chaos in the papacy, where rival factions used even the dead to legitimize their claims to power. Now, for a quirky tidbit. After the trial, Pope Formosus's corpse was stripped of its robes, had its 3 fingers, used for blessing, cut off, and was eventually tossed into the Tiber River. Talk about being drowned in controversy. Later, his remains were retrieved and reburied with dignity. Imagine being a cleric in that courtroom, trying to keep a straight face while arguing with a skeleton seated across from you. It's a mix of absurd theater and bitter politics that feels like a dark comedy scripted by the maddest playwright in history. Difference between shivering all night or catching some real rest. This strange trial also underscores how power dynamics can twist institutions, leading to bizarre outcomes that defy logic and humanity. The Cadaver Synod stands as a grim reminder that sometimes history's battles are fought not just between living men, but against ghosts of the past, quite literally. Immune to rust. You wonder, so, as you settle deeper into your pillows tonight, picture that eerie courtroom, candlelight flickering on bones, where the dead pope faces judgment in a drama that feels part nightmare, part dark farce. Proof that history is often stranger than fiction. Yes, historians still debate how common hot brick bed warming actually was versus being a luxury for the wealthy. You're strolling through London's busy streets in 1814, the air thick with the comforting aroma of malt and hops, when suddenly a booming crash sends people scattering. Behind you, a brewery's massive vats have ruptured, releasing a tidal wave of frothy beer that barrels down the alleys like a foamy, hoppy tsunami. Welcome to the infamous. You probably won't survive this if you think beer is just a refreshing drink. Tonight, it's a destructive force of nature. The disaster began when a giant vat at the Muse and Company brewery ruptured, releasing over 135,000 gallons of beer. Historians still argue whether the brewery's outdated vats and poor maintenance were to blame, or if the ferocity of the flood was worsened by the tightly packed urban landscape. Either way, this sudsy catastrophe exposed the dark side of industrial brewing in the heart of London. Duties. Here's a quirky tidbit. The brewery owners were never held legally responsible for the deaths because the court ruled the flood an act of God, despite the fact that the vats were prone to bursting and had shown warning signs. Imagine trying to explain to your insurance company that your home was destroyed by a river of ale. But the floodwaters, rich with yeast and sugar, left a sticky residue that reportedly attracted swarms of insects and caused lingering odors for weeks, making the city smell like a giant keg gone bad. Local kids reportedly tried to scoop up the beer from the streets, which might sound fun, but considering the contamination, probably wasn't the best idea. Picture the chaos. People scrambling for safety, horses skidding on slippery cobblestones, and pubs ironically emptied by a flood of their own product. The London beer flood is one of those bizarre events where everyday life literally turned upside down by an unexpected, intoxicating force. And you're the grim punctuation mark. And here's a thought. This catastrophe might have inspired scarcity of fresh coffee. Sometimes supply lines got cut, and troops went days without the comforting brown brew. You'd hear grumbles from the men, and even the officers seemed crankier without their morning cup. But in a drafty stone chamber, every degree counts. One veteran once said, "The instant coffee was the only thing that kept me human." When you're surrounded by mud, blood, and death, a cup of coffee feels like a little piece of home. You nod, understanding exactly what he means, even if the coffee tastes like sadness. Someone nods at you approvingly. You assume it's because you didn't faint. You try to imagine a hot cafe somewhere far away, the scent of fresh ground beans filling the air. It seems like a dream. Luxury you might never taste again. The idea that some people get to wake up and have a perfect latte seems almost cruel. Wave approaches, engulfing streets, homes, and people alike. This is the great By midday, your instant coffee is cold and gritty. You toss it aside and dig into the chocolate bar. It's the kind designed to last a lifetime and taste like it, too. You force yourself to swallow a chunk, reminding yourself it's sugar and calories. The molasses exploded outward at an estimated 30. Later, as you move through the trenches, you spot an empty tin. Some enterprising soldier has fashioned a makeshift coffee pot out of it, burning pine needles beneath to brew a smoky cup. You ask for a sip, and while it tastes like liquid ash, you're grateful. It's coffee. That night, you lie on the cold ground and dream not of coffee, but of the quiet moments back home, sitting on a porch with a warm cup, watching the sunrise without fear or hunger. You clutch the empty coffee packet and wonder if you'll ever taste anything like that again, Dot. You drag yourself out of the tent just as dawn spills pale light across the endless expanse of mud and broken trees. Your stomach protests, but there's no time to feel sorry for it. Today's ration is the dreaded K ration. 3 small metal boxes designed to be carried by foot soldiers like you during long marches or emergencies. Compact, lightweight, and frank. Each box holds a mix of canned meat, biscuits, chocolate, and powdered drinks, all packaged to last months on end. You open the first box with a grimace, revealing a thick slab of what's called sea ration meat. It's grayish-brown, smells like a mixture of rubber. Here's a fact. The K ration was designed by a man named Ansel Keys, a nutritionist tasked with feeding millions of soldiers efficiently. It had to be light enough to carry, nutritious enough to sustain, and durable enough to survive jungle humidity or icy winters. The problem: the taste often left soldiers craving anything else. Quirky tidbit, soldiers quickly nicknamed parts of the K ration after their contents, like little chocolate bars of despair, or the meat that tasted like the inside of a boot. One particularly creative nickname was Sea Ration Surprise, because you never knew what mystery. You move on to the crackers. Dry, bland, and so hard that trying to break them without teeth hurts your hands. You wonder if the makers ever considered how many soldiers might be missing a tooth or two after months in combat. Then you shove a cracker into your mouth, grinding it between your molars like a machine. For 6 days, destroying vast swaths of Rome, displacing tens of thousands, and forever scarring the city's heart. Biting chance. As a villain in the popular imagination. Next comes the tiny can of powdered lemonade. It's supposed to be refreshing, but all you taste is sugar and chalk. You mix it with water from your canteen and take a sip. The sweetness makes your teeth ache. Still, it washes down the meat better than water alone. Struggling to breathe through, you notice a small packet labeled Vitamin C tablets. Some soldiers swear by popping these daily, hoping to keep scurvy and other deficiencies at bay. You tuck the packet in your pocket, unsure if you'll remember to take them tomorrow, and became part of his notorious legacy. Funneled through your awkward role. An odd piece of trivia is that K-rations were sometimes swapped between troops and locals. Allied soldiers gave them to civilians in war zones, who sometimes found the strange food fascinating, if confusing. In some cases, the local populations incorporated the rations into their own cooking, creating unexpected fusion meals. Faint mineral tang of centuries-old plumbing. You finish the first box and open the second. This one has chewing gum, which feels like a small luxury. It freshens your breath and distracts you from the monotony of the rest of the meal. You chew thoughtfully, aware that gum is one of the few comforts you have left. Infants rose from the ashes, signaling both destruction and rebirth. Or assist in childbirth. Historians debate whether this was a pragmatic dual role or an attempt at atonement. Then, the third box contains a little chocolate bar, a dense, dark square that feels like it might fuel a tank if you ate enough of it. It's bitter, not sweet, and melts reluctantly in your mouth. Still, you savor it. And body spray, but artisanally Roman. The position, but maybe it's how they coped. You can't help but compare this to the rations from other countries. British troops get bulldog biscuits. The Soviets eat whatever they can forage. The Japanese rely on rice balls and dried fish. Your ration, though, feels like a compromise between nutritional necessity and how little can we spend. A fellow soldier jokes that K-rations are a test of patience and dental endurance. You laugh, but feel the truth behind the joke. You've known guys who've chewed through cans and wrapped themselves in ration packaging to stave off hunger and cold. Later that day, as you trudge through mud, you recall a strange wartime recipe where soldiers mixed crushed K-rations with water to make a sort of porridge. Desperation turns any food into something edible, even if the texture is closer to glue dot. You remember that old joke about K-rations. If you survived the taste, you survived the war. You nod in grim. By evening, you're tired, hungry, and a little hopeful that tomorrow's ration might bring something different. But deep down, you know it probably won't. You tuck the empty boxes away, feeling the dull ache of hunger gnawing at you again. Aches and a lot more broken glass. Was it a necessity born of poverty, a clever heat hack, or as you lie down, you wonder about the soldiers in other parts of the world, eating their own versions of these ration horrors. You realize that no matter where the war rages, soldiers share the same basic struggle. To find comfort and sustenance in the worst of circumstances, sleep comes slowly. You wake up to the dull clatter of mess tins being shuffled, and the faint smell of something unfamiliar drifting through the camp. Today's meal is different. A rare treat, actually. Freshly baked bread. Well, freshly baked might be bread, it turns out, was a surprisingly important morale booster during the war. The idea of breaking bread with your comrades, even if it's dense and slightly stale, gave soldiers a fleeting sense of normalcy amid the chaos. The smell alone could lift spirits more than any speech from a commanding officer. Convulsing and shaking without apparent cause. Here's a mainstream fact. The Allied forces, especially the British and Americans, set up mobile bakeries near the front lines to supply fresh bread as often as possible. It wasn't a trendy artisan product back then. It was simply how bread got made. Wild yeast and bacteria worked their magic to raise the dough slowly, giving bread its chew and flavor. There were also sweetbreads, often enriched with eggs, honey, or dried fruits, reserved for special occasions and religious festivals. You nibble on a small piece of honey cake offered by a cheerful baker, the sweetness cutting through the usual earthiness of the day's fare. Using a loaf as an impromptu helmet when a grenade exploded nearby. Thankfully, he survived. You pause and notice the baker pulling out a large wooden paddle, deftly sliding loaves into a roaring brick oven. These ovens, often shared by entire villages, were crucial community hubs. Baking bread was a social event. Here's a little-known fact. In some medieval towns, bread was even used as currency. Bakers and millers bartered their loaves for other goods and services, making bread a literal currency of survival. You glance at the crowd, where a street performer juggles loaves, drawing laughter as you finish your slice. You think about the simplicity and complexity wrapped up in every loaf. The labor, the craft, the social codes baked right in. Medieval bread wasn't just food, it was the foundation of life, a humble hero of countless stories. And so, with the taste of crust and crumb, you find yourself drawn to the scent of roasting meat, smoky and rich, curling through the crisp morning air like a slow invitation. The crackle of firewood and the occasional pop of sizzling fat punctuate the market's steady murmur. This is Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's sink our teeth into medieval meat snacks. Near hypothermia can provide. Meat was an expensive luxury for most people. Hunting rights were jealously guarded by the nobility, and peasants often had to make do with the scraps from the lord's table or preserved meats. But preserved meats, salted, smoked, or dried, were the original medieval junk food, you might say. Portable, high energy. One popular medieval street snack was black pudding, a kind of blood sausage made from pig's blood mixed with fat and grains. The idea might make you pause, but it was highly nutritious and cherished for its rich, earthy flavor. Vendors would slice it thin and fry it up, selling it piping hot to passers-by. Another street favorite was pork pies, small, dense pastries filled with spiced pork and baked until golden brown. They were convenient, portable, and hearty, a medieval equivalent to today's handheld fast food. Bakers often experimented with herbs like thyme, pepper, and even rosewater to flavor, while meat was prized, offal. Organ meats, like liver, kidneys, and heart, was more common among the lower classes. These parts were often fried or stewed with strong spices and vinegar to mask any unpleasant flavors. You watch a street cook flipping sizzling kidney skewers, the aroma sharp and intriguing. Medieval taverns were hotspots for meat junk food. Thick slices of bread topped with melted cheese and bits of salted pork formed early versions of what we might now call open-faced sandwiches. These trencher pies, or meat-on-bread snacks, were easy to eat, filling, and perfect for soaking up ale. Speaking of ale, it was the beverage of choice for many. Often you overhear a scholar debating whether the abundance of meat snacks in towns was a cause or effect of urban growth in medieval Europe. Were these snacks a sign of rising prosperity, or just a clever way for city folk to manage limited resources? Here's another interesting twist. As you wipe your fingers, slick with grease and spices, you realize that medieval junk food wasn't just about indulgence. It was survival, creativity, and social bonding, wrapped in flaky pastry and smoky fat. You step away from the smoky stall. The air thickens now with the sweet smell of honey and spices, mingling with the faintest trace of burnt sugar. You drift toward a modest wooden cart, where a wizened vendor dusts powdered sugar over golden, deep-fried dough that crackles softly beneath your fingers. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, share your location and local time down below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background. Sugar was a rare luxury, imported at great cost from the East, making it a prized ingredient mainly among the wealthy. For the common folk, honey was the primary sweetener. Here's a quirky detail. Medieval cooks sometimes flavored sweets with spices like saffron or rosewater, lending them an exotic flair that modern cupcakes could only dream of. It was the medieval version of gourmet, but with a pinch of alchemy. Stark contrast to the canned meats and biscuits in the West. You chew thoughtfully and sip your water, pondering how food historians still argue whether medieval European sweet dishes influenced early Middle Eastern desserts or vice versa, reflecting the era's complex trade routes and cultural exchanges. And misery of war. Nightmare. And that's a failure you refuse. You watch as the vendor dips pieces of fried dough into thick honey, then sprinkles them with crushed nuts, an early form of what might now be called fried dough with toppings, a precursor to today's carnival treats. The crunch and stickiness make you smile, but the richness also reminds you why these sweets were often reserved for celebrations. Still be a comfort, even here, to the execution's outcome and public perception. Some medieval sweets were surprisingly sophisticated. Marzipan, made from ground almonds and sugar, was molded into elaborate shapes. Fruits, animals, even tiny scenes from courtly life, showcasing the confectioner's skill and imagination. You overhear a heated debate among scholars about whether the popularity of sweets at medieval banquets contributed to early dental problems. Cavities and toothaches weren't exactly a rarity back then. Units to treat water from streams, rivers, and wells. It was a matter of life and death, since contaminated water could spread dysentery, cholera, and typhoid faster than enemy fire. Psychosomatic, or a strange blend of both. Interestingly, medieval medical texts sometimes prescribed sweets as remedies for melancholy or digestive troubles, blurring the line between medicine and dessert. A spoonful of sugar to soothe the soul, quite literally. Or even threw in chewing gum, though it rarely helped much. Priests to conduct elaborate exorcisms and processions. The clear intent. Street vendors sold simpler treats too. Candied fruits, spiced nuts, and small cakes flavored with herbs like mint or anise. The market's sweet corner was a bustling spot of chatter, laughter, and sticky fingers. You spot a small boy eagerly devouring a sugar-glazed apple. As you step away, the scent of honey and toasted almonds lingers on your skin. Medieval sweets, like the savory junk foods you've tried, reveal a world where flavor, status, and survival intertwined in every bite. You wonder what other surprises the medieval pantry still hides, waiting to be uncovered one story at a time. More of a lifestyle. The market noise fades into a softer rhythm as you drift toward the cool shadow of a large wooden cart, piled high with wheels of cheese and clusters of nuts. The sharp, tangy smell of aged dairy greets you like an old friend. Welcome to. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And remember to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on. Cheese was a dietary staple across Europe, prized not just for its taste but for its durability. Hard cheeses could last months, even years, making them a perfect food for travelers, soldiers, and peasants alike. The methods for making cheese varied wildly. Some cheeses were rubbed with ash or herbs, others left to develop a pungent rind that could either delight or repel the unprepared nose. You look a quirky fact. Some medieval cheeses were so strong-smelling they were nicknamed stinking cheeses, and legend says they were sometimes used as weapons in bar fights. Imagine tossing a wheel of cheese, as historians still argue whether certain cheeses were regional specialties or spread across Europe through trade and monastic influence. The truth is that cheese-making was a living tradition, evolving with every village and farmhouse. Beside the cheese, there are bowls of nuts, walnuts, hazelnuts, and almonds, the latter often imported and costly, reserved for. Here's an unexpected twist. Almonds were sometimes soaked and blended into a milk substitute known as almond milk, widely used by those who abstained from dairy for religious or health reasons. You sip a cool glass and find the flavor subtle, nutty, and oddly refreshing. You notice that cheese and nuts frequently appeared together in medieval banquets, often paired with sweet elements like dried fruits or honey, creating a complex dance of flavors and textures. It is both comfort and doom. Interestingly, some recipes included cheese fritters, where cheese was mixed with flour and eggs, then fried until golden. These were popular snacks, easy to eat on the move, and packed with energy. You will overhear a scholarly debate on whether medieval cheese consumption patterns influenced social stratification, with certain cheeses symbolizing regional pride or noble tastes. Captivated doctors, artists, and philosophers alike. and whose echoes still ripple through psychology today. The crowd hushes, a breath held in collective suspense. You nibble on a toasted hazelnut, its crunch sharp and warming. A perfect counterpoint to the dense cheese. Together, they feel like a small, ancient feast, simple yet deeply satisfying. Tree medicine. As you step back, you realize that medieval cheese and nuts were more than just food. They were portable powerhouses, conversation starters, and sometimes even status symbols, all wrapped up in humble packages. You move on with a new appreciation for these old-world snacks, wondering which other curious flavors will tickle your senses next. Morning cup, but it's enough to stir you awake. You wander further into the marketplace, where the air grows thicker with the scent of fermented goods, tangy, yeasty, and just a little sour. You find yourself near barrels brimming with pickled vegetables and pots of pungent sauces. This is the medieval world of fermented junk food, where preservation and flavor collide in ways that might raise your eyebrows today. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe fermentation was a lifesaver in the medieval diet, especially when fresh produce was scarce during long winters. Cabbage, turnips, and cucumbers were common candidates for pickling, often submerged. Interestingly, medieval cooks also fermented fish and meats, creating pungent delicacies like garum, a fermented fish sauce originally from the Mediterranean, prized for its umami punch. This ancient condiment was the ancestor. Historians still argue whether the widespread use of fermentation was driven primarily by necessity or if it evolved as a deliberate culinary art. Either way, these preserved foods were essential for medieval survival. You sample a dollop of thick, fermented foods also played a role in medieval medicine. Many believed these sour bites could aid digestion and cleanse the body of bad humors, though such beliefs were mixed with superstition. At a nearby stall, you observe a vendor stirring a bubbling vat of mead, a fermented honey drink, sweet but with a sharp kick. Mead was often homemade, celebrated at feasts, and considered both a drink. You notice that fermentation also influenced bread making. Sourdough starters relied on natural yeasts and bacteria, creating flavors you've already encountered in medieval bread. It's like fermentation was the secret thread weaving through many medieval foods. You overhear a lively debate as you wipe the tangy relish from your lips. You realize that medieval fermentation was a blend of necessity, creativity, and flavor innovation, a way to stretch resources and surprise the palate. You move on, senses tingling with sour memories, ready to explore more curious culinary corners of the past. You step away from the sharp tang of fermented foods and into the warm, fragrant world of medieval beverages, where ale and mead bubble in wooden casks and cups clink in crowded taverns. This is where the medieval. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Don't forget to drop your location and local time too. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's raise a tankard to medieval drinks. Warnings. Don't go out on a Friday the 13th, lest you join the ranks yourself. Ale was the everyday beverage of choice for many, favored not just for taste, but because it was safer to drink than often contaminated water sources. Unlike modern beer, medieval ale was generally weaker and less hopped, with a shorter shelf life, but it provided essential calories and hydration. Mead, made from fermented honey and water, was the luxury alternative. Sweeter and more potent, often flavored with herbs, spices, or even fruits. Mead carried a certain mystique, sometimes called the drink of the gods. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some medieval brewers experimented by adding strange ingredients like juniper berries, nettles, or even burnt bread crusts to their brews, influencing the flavor profiles in ways that would surprise. Historians still argue whether medieval alehouses were primarily social hubs, fostering community, or places of vice and disorder. Either way, they were central to daily life, often doubling as inns and meeting spots. You watch a group of laborers clinking mugs, their laughter filling the tavern's smoky air. These alehouses were places to unwind. Another fascinating medieval drink was small beer, a low-alcohol brew consumed even by children, prized for its nutritive qualities and safety compared to water. It was a daily staple, lightly fermented and refreshing. Wine was also present, but mainly reserved for the wealthy or in southern regions where grapes grew more easily. You overhear a debate about whether alcohol consumption in medieval Europe contributed more to social cohesion or to public health problems, a question historians still explore. Interestingly, medieval recipes sometimes called for brewing beer with gruit. You take a mental sip, feeling the warmth spread, the social buzz enveloping you. Medieval drinks were as much about culture and survival as they were about flavor. With a last glance at the crowded tavern, you step back into the night, ready for the next chapter of your edible medieval adventure. You leave the warm tavern buzz behind and find yourself on a narrow, dusty path that leads to the medieval street food stalls and the original food trucks, minus the wheels but full of sizzling surprises. These quick bites were the medieval answer to junk food on the go. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And don't forget to share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's bite into. Street vendors sold all kinds of fried snacks, small meat pies, crispy fritters, and skewers of spiced meat sizzling over open flames. The smell of frying fat mingles with the dusty streets, a tempting but sometimes overwhelming aroma. Here's a quirky detail. Some vendors specialized in unusual offal treats, fried brains, sweetbreads, or even roasted pig's ears. Delicacies for those willing to get adventurous. These were the medieval version of today's exotic food trend, though perhaps less. You watch as a vendor flips thick pancakes, called cakes or fritters, made from coarse grains and flavored with honey or dried fruits for sweetness. These were popular breakfast items for those on the go. Another popular street snack was flitters, thin pancakes sometimes served with butter or cheese. They were simple, affordable. You overhear the clatter of a roasting spit, turning slabs of meat over glowing coals. Meat skewers were often seasoned with spices like pepper, which was a luxury, so street food offered a chance to taste flavor. Interestingly, some medieval recipes for fried foods called for unusual fats, like goose or even fish oil, which gave the snacks unique flavors and aromas. Imagine biting into something fried in fish oil today. Carve tighter and take another careful sip of soup. You notice a small child licking honey from a stick. A street vendor's sweet treat made from crystallized honey or thick syrup. These simple sugary snacks were accessible to all, a medieval version of the lollipop. Innovations that reshaped wartime eating. The debate among scholars about street food hygiene in medieval cities remains lively. Did street vendors maintain decent cleanliness? Or did these quick snacks sometimes pose health risks? The answer is unclear, but it's safe you savor the crispy edges of a fried fritter, the contrast of textures and flavors, reminding you that medieval junk food was far from bland or boring. It was a dynamic street experience, full of surprises and variety. You drift away from the smoky streets and find yourself in the dim, flickering light of a medieval kitchen, where strange concoctions bubble and steam rises from pots full of mystery. This is where medieval junk food gets experimental. Sweet. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, share your location and local time. Now, medieval cooks loved combining flavors that might surprise modern palates: meat with fruit, spices with honey, and herbs with cheese. Think of a pie filled with lamb, raisins, cinnamon, and almonds. A balance of sweet and savory that defies today's. One popular treat was the marchpane, an almond-based sweet paste shaped into fruits and animals, often served at feasts to impress guests. You imagine its dense, sugary texture and delicate flavors. Historians still argue whether medieval recipes reflected common tastes or were mainly designed for the nobility, with peasants eating much simpler fare. The reality probably varied regionally and by social class. You notice that sugar was rare and expensive, so sweet medieval pies were often heavy on the crust, designed to preserve the filling and act as a portable container. Sometimes the crust was discarded after eating the filling, leading to jokes about coffin pies. You overhear a debate about whether the medieval palate was more adventurous or conservative than modern tastes. Some argue they embraced complex flavor combos, while others suggest they preferred familiar comfort. In a way, feeling gratitude for the humble invention that helped to keep millions alive. Another unexpected medieval snack was frumenti, a wheat-based porridge often sweetened and spiced, eaten hot or cold, a kind of ancient comfort food. You bite into a small spiced pastry filled with dried fruit, savoring the interplay of cinnamon and medieval kitchens were places of innovation as well as necessity, constantly adapting recipes to seasonal ingredients, available spices, and social trends. You leave the kitchen, your mind swirling with flavors both familiar and foreign, eager to discover what other edible stories medieval life holds. Catullus. No one corrects him. Some thought your shadow brought bad luck. Executioners were said to be cursed, unable to marry, or doomed to die violently. These superstitions made your job lonely, even when you were surrounded by crowds. You drift from the kitchen's warmth into the cool shadows of the medieval feast hall, where grand tables groan beneath platters piled high with curious junk food meant to impress and sometimes confuse guests. You probably won't survive this banquet without feeling a bit overwhelmed by the spectacle. But before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And do share your location and local time. Feasts were about more than just eating. They were performances of power, wealth, and social order. Among the extravagant dishes, you find some of the most elaborate forms of junk food. Fried pastries, stuffed pastries, and deep-fried meatballs infused with exotic spices. It was partly a mechanism to keep the peace. By setting you apart, society protected itself from the moral weight of your duties. One standout was the pasty, or pie, often stuffed with a mix of meats, dried fruits, and nuts, glazed with egg for shine and crunch. You can almost feel the flaky crust giving way to warm, aromatic filling. Comfort food wrapped in. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval nobles loved subtleties, edible table decorations, crafted to look like animals, ships, or mythical creatures, made from marzipan, sugar, or pastry. These were both junk food and visual entertainment. Historians still argue whether these You notice that the wealthy often enjoyed heavy use of spices imported from the East. Cinnamon, ginger, pepper, and more, that turned simple fried snacks into complex flavor experiences. Alcoholic punches infused with herbs and spices were popular at feasts, mixing honey, wine, and sometimes ale for sweet, warming drinks that paired. Street vendors and common folk had much simpler fare, but at feasts the contrast was striking. The same fried doughs and pastries, but elevated with exotic ingredients and artistic presentation. You overhear whispers about the debates among historians, about whether medieval feasting encouraged excess and waste, or was a vital social glue keeping communities together. Here's the thing about Roman bathhouses. Not everything in the steam is friendly. It deepened your isolation. One surprising note is that some fried foods were believed to aid digestion after heavy meals, though medical advice then was a mix of superstition and early science. You take a slow breath, picturing yourself nibbling a spiced meatball or a honey-glazed pastry under flickering candlelight. Feasts, with their sensory overload of flavors, sights, and sounds, reveal how medieval junk food could be both common sustenance and lavish indulgence. You step back from the hall's bustle, feeling a touch more connected to the strange, flavorful world of medieval. You leave behind the clatter and chatter of the feast, and find yourself wandering through a quiet medieval market at dawn, where the vendors prepare their goods and curious delicacies, some meant for everyday snacking, others for special occasions, await eager buyers. You probably won't survive this slow. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, please share your location and local time. Now, markets were the heart of medieval food trade, where fresh produce mingled with dried fruits, nuts, and preserved snacks, the medieval equivalents of your modern granola bars or jerky. You inhale the preservation was key to medieval snacking. Smoking, drying, pickling, and salting transformed perishable ingredients into lasting treats. Dried fruit like figs and apricots were prized snacks, portable and sweet, perfect for travelers or children. Here's a quirky tidbit. Medieval merchants sometimes used spices as a form of currency. Historians still argue whether medieval marketplaces were hygienic enough to safely sell prepared foods, Or if customers took health risks knowingly, you notice vendors offering conserve jams made from boiling fruits with sugar or honey, spreading sweet preserves on coarse bread for a quick, delicious snack. Meat jerky was another staple, often spiced and dried in the sun or over smoke. You imagine the chewiness and rich flavor, a protein-packed nibble that could last through long journeys. Bakers displayed fresh breads and sweet rolls, some enriched with fruits or nuts, tempting passers-by with warm aromas. Of societal violence, wrapped in sanitized bureaucracy, pickled vegetables and fermented cabbage, think proto-sauerkraut, also appeared, adding a sour punch to the otherwise sweet and salty market offerings. You overhear a heated discussion about whether medieval snack preservation techniques influenced modern One unexpected snack was comfits, sugar-coated seeds or nuts, popular for their sweetness and believed medicinal properties. You reach out to touch a small honeycomb chunk, sticky and golden, imagining the bees laboring hours to produce this ancient sweet treat. Feeling the cool air wrap around you like a shroud. The executioner's life is a paradox, defined by endings but touched by hope. The market's rhythm is calming, the quiet before the city's bustle fully awakens. You realize that medieval junk food wasn't just about immediate pleasure. It was about clever preservation, portable nourishment, and social exchange. With a soft breath you step away. Ready, you feel yourself sinking deeper into the soft twilight of medieval life, where the days last light. Before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, as always, share your location and local time. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's close this chapter of medieval junk food together. Doesn't take break. As the medieval city settles down, you reflect on the incredible variety of snacks and treats, from smoky street stalls and savory pies to sugary confections and preserved market delights. These foods weren't just fuel, they were culture, status, and a quirky final detail. Some medieval recipes called for using crushed pearls or powdered precious stones as an ingredient, clearly not for flavor, but as a display of wealth. Imagine that on your midnight Sleep approaches slowly, like the final crumb falling from a crusty pie. Your eyelids grow heavier with each heartbeat, your mind swimming through flavors and stories, the warmth of history wrapping around you. Rest. Easy, knowing that tomorrow you'll wake, perhaps a little wiser about the strange, wonderful world of medieval junk food, and maybe a little more grateful for modern snacks.